Hey folks, welcome back to the Sedgwick Jimmy channel and a look at another great ruler in history, Richard I, also known as Richard the Lionheart. He's primarily known for leading a crusade, being a brave warrior, and giving away Maid Marian at Robin Hood's wedding. Okay, that last one didn't really happen, but it's how most people know him. He was King of England for nearly 10 years, even though we're pretty sure he couldn't speak English and he could barely understand it. How did that happen? Well, let's get into it. Richard was born in 1157 in Oxford, England, the third son and fourth child of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine. He was also the great-great-grandson of William the Conqueror. Fun little fact there. He was raised and educated in England, learning French and Limousin. He was raised and educated in England, learning French and Limousin, an Occitan dialect from rural France, until he was 8, when his mother took him with her to Normandy. In 1171, Henry officially put a 14-year-old Richard in charge of Aquitaine, where he and his mother went on a goodwill tour. Henry II gave all three of his eldest sons land which to oversee due to his failing health. However, this caused some issues. Henry still held the purse strings, so to do anything they had to clear it with him first, leading to his sons and his wife to ask Louis VII, King of France, for his help. And thus began the revolt of 1173. 3 sons and their mother against their dad. Fun stuff. Henry offered a peace treaty to his sons, granting them rather generous land holdings, but they turned him down after consulting with the King of France. Though it started out well for the rebels, Henry began to gain the upper hand, capturing Eleanor as well as the wives of his sons. Rebellions across England were put down, and Henry began to reconquer any lands he had lost in France. In 1174, Henry signed a peace treaty with Louis, ending the revolt, and Henry's sons came to his court asking for his forgiveness, which he granted. And, to keep them in line, Henry kept their mother as a prisoner until his death. Richard was tasked with putting down the barons he had riled up against his father, during which he first gained the nickname Lionheart due to his bravery and fierce leadership. Let's be honest, Henry really didn't trust Richard, and after some back and forth, he sent his 2 eldest sons to take Richard's lands. This failed, both brothers died, and Richard turned to the new French king Philip II for help. With the French army behind him, Richard fought off the English left at his or French lands before moving with Philip against his father at Balans. They defeated Henry, and he named Richard as his heir to the throne. Henry died 2 days later, and Richard was crowned as Richard I. Richard was crowned king in 1189 at the age of 32. A year later, he was leading a crusade beside Philip II. Their first stop was Sicily, where the king, William II, had died and his cousin Tancred had seized the throne. This really didn't matter to Richard, except that William's widow had been imprisoned by Tancred, and that widow just happened to be Richard's sister, Joan. After capturing the city of Messina, the two came to terms, and Joan was released with her inheritance intact. The Crusaders left Sicily but hit a storm on the way that wrecked many of the ships. He found several of the ships off the coast of Cyprus and also found that everybody on board the vessels had been taken prisoner, including his sister Joan, and that his treasure ship had been plundered. The island's ruler, Isaac, refused to release the people or the treasure, so Richard took the island. He would eventually sell it to the leader of the Knights Templar, Robert IV de Sebel. Before leaving Cyprus as a much richer man, he married Berengaria of Navarre, and they set off for Acre. After landing outside Acre, his forces joined the siege of the city, which was completed not long after with the surrender of Saladin's forces. Now in charge of the city, infighting between the leaders led to both Leopold V of Austria and Philip II of France to take their balls and go home, leaving Richard without allies. He continued his march to war by defeating Saladin once more at the Battle of Arsuf, leading to the taking of the city of Jaffa by the Christians. They then planned to march on to Jerusalem, but bad weather held them back and they retreated to the coastal cities. After another failed attempt to reach Jerusalem due to dissension in the ranks, and prodded on by the news that Philip and his brother John were conspiring to take the crown from him, Richard and Saladin reached a peace agreement, wherein pilgrims of all religions were allowed into Jerusalem and a 3-year truce was declared. Richard then began his journey back to England. He began to sail back to his kingdom, though weather halted this, and his ship wrecked, leaving him to a dangerous overland trip. He was captured by Leopold, remember him? And he wasn't the biggest fan of Richard, considering he thought Richard had killed his cousin and had torn his flag down from Acre and cast it into the moat. Now, holding the leader of a crusading army was rather frowned upon, and Leopold was excommunicated from the church. He handed Richard over to the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Henry VI, who needed money to raise an army and thusly held Richard for a ransom of 100,000 pounds of silver. This got Henry excommunicated from the church. However, through seizure of assets and high taxation, the ransom was paid and Richard was released. After his release, he traveled back to France in order to retake the lands that Philip, with help from his brother John, had conquered in his time away. Richard forgave John, even naming him as his heir, and then he went to work. His father-in-law in Navarre invaded French lands from the south as Richard raised funds for further military campaigns and retook all the lands that had fallen. While quelching a revolt in Chalus-Chabrol, Richard was shot by a crossbow when inspecting his defenses unprotected. The wound became infected and he fell greatly ill. He had the man who shot him, who turned out to be little but a boy, brought to him, giving the boy a full pardon and a gift of 100 shillings. He died a few weeks later on April 6, 1199, at the age of 41, his death referred to as the lion by the ant slain due to the circumstances. Richard bankrupted his country to pay for his wars, then bankrupted it again to pay for his ransom. He spent perhaps as much as 6 months of his adult life in the country he ruled, and yet is remembered fondly. But, that's history for you. And that's just going to about do it for this episode. If you liked it, give us a like. If you want to see more, give us a subscribe. And if you have anything to add or any ideas for future topics, let us know down in the comments. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you here again next time. For more Sedgwick Jimmy, come check it out.